The morning sun cast long shadows across the barren landscape of New Mexico territory, its harsh light revealing the poverty that clung to the Bellamy homestead like dust on old leather. Clara Bellamy stood at the edge of their meager property, her calloused hands gripping a worn bucket as she prepared to draw water from their nearly dry well. At 19, she possessed a beauty that seemed out of place in this desolate corner of the world. Golden hair that caught the light despite the dirt, eyes the color of prairie sky, and a grace that years of hardship hadn't managed to extinguish. Inside the ramshackle cabin, her brothers Tom and Samuel were already deep in their cups despite the early hour. The death of their parents 2 winters past had unleashed something dark in the men, transforming them from merely difficult siblings into cruel strangers who viewed Clara as little more than unpaid labor. "Clara!" Tom's voice boomed from within, thick with drink. "Where's breakfast, girl?" She hurried inside, setting the water bucket down carefully. The cabin reeked of stale whiskey and unwashed bodies. Samuel sat slouched at the rough-hewn table, his bloodshot eyes following her movements with an unsettling intensity. "Coming right up?" Clara said softly, moving to the iron stove where she'd left biscuits warming. Her hands trembled slightly as she served them, a movement born not from fear, but from exhaustion. She'd been up since before dawn tending to their few remaining horses, the only valuable assets the family still possessed. "These horses better fetch a good price in town," Samuel muttered, shoving a biscuit into his mouth. "Or we're finished." Tom exchanged a look with his brother that Clara didn't catch, busy as she was cleaning the already spotless kitchen area. It was the same look they'd shared for weeks now, heavy with conspiracy and greed. "Actually, Clara," Tom said, his tone shifting to something falsely pleasant that made her spine stiffen. "We've been thinking. You should come with us to Santa Fe this time. Might be opportunities there for a girl like you." Clara paused, her back still turned. In 3 years of taking their horses to market, they'd never once offered to bring her along. "What kind of opportunities?" "Work," Samuel said quickly. "Respectable work. Maybe in one of those fancy hotels or as a seamstress. Better than wasting away out here." For a moment, hope fluttered in Clara's chest like a caged bird. The thought of escaping this place, of earning her own money, of perhaps finding some measure of independence. She turned to face them, searching their faces for signs of deception. "You mean it? You'd help me find work?" Tom's smile was too wide, too eager. "Course we would. Little sister, family looks after family." The irony of those words would haunt Clara in the days to come, but in that moment, she allowed herself to believe them. She nodded slowly. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow dawn," Samuel said, already turning his attention back to his whiskey. "Pack light." That evening, Clara carefully folded her 2 good dresses, one brown calico for every day, one faded blue cotton she'd worn to their parents' funeral. She added her mother's Bible, a small silver locket with a photograph of her parents, and the few coins she'd managed to hide away over the months. Her movements were precise, hopeful. She even allowed herself to hum softly as she worked, a melody her mother used to sing. The next morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Clara climbed into the back of their wagon, settling between sacks of feed and supplies. Tom and Samuel sat up front, passing a flask between them despite the early hour. The horses were tied behind, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust as they began the long journey towards Santa Fe. For the first few hours, Clara dozed fitfully, lulled by the wagon's rhythm. When she woke, the sun was high and merciless. Her throat was parched, but when she reached for the water canteen, she found it empty. "Tom," she called, "could we stop for water?" "Soon," came the curt reply. But soon never came. Instead, as the afternoon wore on, Clara noticed they'd turned off the main road onto a barely visible trail that wound through scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. This wasn't the way to Santa Fe. "Where are we going?" Alarm crept into her voice. Neither brother answered. The trail led to a cluster of weather-beaten buildings that looked more like a way station than any town. Clara's heart began to pound as she saw the armed men lounging in the shade, their eyes tracking the wagon's approach with predatory interest. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. "Tom, I want to go home," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Shut up," Samuel snarled, the false friendliness completely gone now. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the largest building. A man emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face marked by violence and cruelty. His clothes were fine but dusty, and he wore his guns low on his hips like a man accustomed to using them. "These the Bellamy boys?" His voice was cultured, at odds with his rough appearance. "Yes, sir, Mr. Morrison," Tom said, climbing down from the wagon with eager subservience. "We brought her, just like we promised." Her. Clara's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She looked between her brothers and the stranger, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, Tom, Samuel, what have you done?" Morrison approached the wagon, his pale eyes assessing her like livestock. "Pretty thing. Virgin. As pure as mountain snow," Samuel assured him, avoiding Clara's stricken gaze. "You're selling me?" Clara's voice cracked. "Your own sister." "Half-sister," Tom corrected coldly. "And we need the money more than we need another mouth to feed." Morrison nodded to two of his men, who moved toward the wagon. Clara scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. Strong hands seized her arms, dragging her from the wagon despite her struggles. "Please," she looked desperately at her brothers. "Please don't do this. Mother would never forgive you. Father would—" "They're dead," Samuel spat. "And good riddance. Now we can finally profit from the one thing of value they left behind." Morrison counted out gold coins into Tom's eager palm, while Clara fought against the men holding her. 20 pieces of gold. That's what her brothers deemed her worth. They didn't look back as they climbed into their wagon, didn't acknowledge her screams as they drove away, leaving her in the hands of strangers. "Put her with the others," Morrison commanded, "and give her something to calm her down. Can't have damaged goods." A sweet-smelling cloth was pressed over Clara's nose and mouth. She tried not to breathe, but eventually, her lungs betrayed her. The world tilted, colors blurring together. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the dust cloud from her brother's wagon disappearing into the distance. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like swimming up through molasses. Clara's head pounded, her mouth tasted of copper, and every muscle ached. She was in a wagon again, but this one was different. Covered, cramped, and reeking of fear and unwashed bodies. As her vision cleared, she realized she wasn't alone. 6 other women huddled in the wagon bed, their ages ranging from perhaps 16 to 30. All wore the same expression of numb terror. Clara's wrists were bound with rough rope, the fibers already cutting into her skin. "Where?" she croaked, then swallowed and tried again. "Where are they taking us?" A woman with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes shifted closer. "West," she whispered. "To the mining camps. Most likely. Or worse." Worse. Clara didn't want to imagine what could be worse. She tested her bonds, but they held firm. Outside, she could hear men's voices, rough laughter, the creak of saddle leather. How many guards? How far from civilization were they now? "I'm Sarah," the gray-haired woman said softly. "From Missouri. Husband died of fever. His brother said he'd help me get to California to start fresh." Her bitter laugh held no humor. "I was a fool." One by one, the other women shared fragments of their stories. Mary, barely 16, taken from her family's farm in the night. Louise, a widow like Sarah, betrayed by those she trusted. Anna, who spoke little English, tears streaming silently down her face. Each tale was a variation on the same theme: women alone, women vulnerable, women valued only for what their bodies could provide to men with gold in their pockets and emptiness in their souls. As the wagon rolled steadily west, Clara closed her eyes and tried to hold on to memories of better times. Her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair. Her father's laugh. The feel of a horse's mane beneath her fingers as she rode across open country. But those memories felt like they belonged to another person, another life. That Clara was gone. Sold for 20 pieces of gold by the very people who should have protected her. Night fell, bringing cold that cut through their thin clothing. The women huddled together for warmth, finding what comfort they could in shared misery. Clara stared out through a gap in the wagon's cover at stars that seemed impossibly distant and uncaring. Somewhere out there, Tom and Samuel were probably drunk on their blood money, toasting their cleverness. She would survive this, Clara vowed silently. Whatever came next, whatever degradation awaited, she would survive. Not for them, never for them, but for herself, and for the memory of parents who would have wept to see her here. The West was vast and cruel, but it was also a place where people could reinvent themselves, where the impossible sometimes became possible. As the wagon rolled through the darkness toward an uncertain future, Clara Bellamy began the transformation from protected daughter to survivor. She didn't know it yet, but this journey into hell would ultimately lead her to a destiny she never could have imagined, one where love would find her in the most unlikely place, and where she would rise from the ashes of her brother's betrayal stronger than she ever thought possible. The October wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain as James Colt guided his black stallion down the dusty trail toward Morrison's compound. At 32, he cut an imposing figure against the harsh landscape, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered features that spoke of years beneath the unforgiving sky. His dark eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, held depths that few dared to explore. He hadn't wanted to come here. The very thought of Morrison's business turned his stomach, but his foreman had convinced him they needed more hands for the upcoming cattle drive. Just household help. Old Pete had assured him. Someone to cook and tend the main house while we're gone. James dismounted outside the compound's gates, his spurs jangling in the stillness. The place reeked of misery and greed, a blight on the territory that the law seemed content to ignore as long as Morrison's bribes kept coming. Guards nodded respectfully as he passed. Even here, the Colt name carried weight. He owned more land than some eastern states, ran more cattle than anyone else in the territory, and his word was as good as gold from here to San Francisco. Morrison emerged from the main building, his oily smile faltering slightly when he saw who his visitor was. "Mr. Colt, this is unexpected." "Pete said you might have someone suitable for household work," James said curtly. "Wanting this business done quickly." Of course. Right this way." Morrison led him toward a long, low building that seemed to crouch against the earth like something shameful. "I have several girls who would be perfect for a gentleman of your standing." The word girls made James's jaw tighten. He followed Morrison into the building, where the smell of fear and desperation was almost physical. Women sat or lay on rough pallets, some staring at nothing, others watching the men with wary eyes. James felt his disgust deepen. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Perhaps this one. Morrison gestured to a young woman with dark hair. Very compliant. Or a commotion from outside interrupted him. Angry voices, the sound of a struggle. Morrison's face darkened. "Excuse me a moment." He stormed out, and James could hear him berating someone about damaged goods and teaching lessons. Unable to stand the oppressive atmosphere inside, James followed. In the courtyard, he saw her. Clara was on her knees in the dirt, blood trickling from a split lip, her golden hair tangled and wild around her face. Despite her position, despite the brutality surrounding her, she held her chin high, defiance blazing in her eyes. One of Morrison's men stood over her, fist raised for another blow. "She bit me," the man snarled. "When I tried to—" "Enough!" James's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Every head turned toward him. He stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the Colt revolver at his hip, the gun that shared his family name and had helped tame this wild country. "No need for that." Morrison hurried over, wringing his hands. My apologies. Mr. Colt, this one's new, still learning her place. I'll have her moved. How much? James heard himself ask, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. She looked back at him, and in that moment, he saw something that stirred a part of him he'd thought dead. Not just her beauty, though she was beautiful, even bloodied and dirt-stained, but a spark of spirit that refused to be extinguished. She's not ready for sale, Morrison said carefully. Still needs breaking in. I asked how much. Morrison named a price that would have bought a dozen horses. James pulled out his money pouch without haggling, counting out the gold coins. Have her things sent to my wagon. And Morrison? He finally looked at the man, letting him see the cold promise in his eyes. If I hear you've laid another hand on her, we'll have a problem. Understood. Morrison swallowed hard. Everyone knew James Colt's reputation, fair but ruthless when crossed, and deadly accurate with both rifle and pistol. Of course, Mr. Colt. She's yours. James turned to Clara, who was watching this exchange with a mixture of confusion and wariness. He extended his hand to help her up, a gesture of basic courtesy that seemed to surprise everyone present. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, her fingers trembling slightly in his grasp. Can you ride? He asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. We've got a ways to go. He led her to where his horse waited, then whistled sharply. Within moments, one of Morrison's men brought out a gentle mare. James helped Clara mount, noting how she moved despite her obvious pain and exhaustion. Someone had taught her to ride properly. They left the compound in silence, James slightly ahead, alert for any sign of pursuit or treachery, but Morrison was too smart to cross him. And soon they were alone on the trail, two figures against the vast canvas of the western sky. For miles, neither spoke. Clara concentrated on staying in the saddle, fighting waves of dizziness from whatever drugs they'd given her and the blow to her head. She studied the man who'd bought her, trying to understand what fate awaited her now. He rode like someone born to it, comfortable in his own skin in a way that spoke of confidence earned, not inherited. His clothes were quality, but practical, none of the flash that some wealthy men affected. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold, James finally called a halt near a small stream. He dismounted and moved to help Clara down, steadying her when her legs buckled. We'll rest here a bit, he said, his voice gentler than she'd expected. Water the horses. Clara sank down on a boulder, watching as he tended to the animals with practiced efficiency. When he brought her a canteen, she drank greedily, the cool water washing away some of the horror of the past days. What's your name? He asked, settling on a rock across from her. Clara, she managed. Clara Bellamy. James Colt. He studied her face. How did you end up in Morrison's hands? The question unleashed a flood of emotion she'd been holding back. To her mortification, tears began to fall. My brothers, they sold me, told me we were going to Santa Fe for work. James's expression darkened, but his voice remained steady. Where are these brothers now? I don't know. Gone. They took their gold and left. She wiped at her tears angrily. I suppose you'll want your money's worth now. I should tell you I'll fight. I don't care if you beat me. Stop. The word was quiet but firm. I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to force you. That's not why I brought you out of there. Clara looked at him suspiciously. Then why? James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. My wife died 3 years ago. Bandits hit our place while I was away on business. He stopped, jaw clenching. They killed her and our daughter. Emily was only 5. The raw pain in his voice made Clara's breath catch. After that, I couldn't stand to have people around the main house. But it's a big place, and it needs tending. Pete convinced me I needed help, suggested Morrison's. He met her eyes. I was going to leave empty-handed until I saw what they were doing to you. Couldn't ride away from that. So you bought me out of pity? I bought you out of decency. he corrected. What you do now is up to you. Work for me if you want. Cooking, keeping house, whatever you're comfortable with. I'll pay fair wages, or once you're healed up, I'll give you money to go wherever you want. Your choice. Clara searched his face for deception, but found none. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, he said bluntly. Trust is earned, but I give you my word, and in these parts, my word means something, that you're safe. No one will lay a hand on you at the Double C Ranch without answering to me. They rode on as darkness fell, stopping only when the horses needed rest. James had packed food in his saddlebags, dried beef, biscuits, even some precious dried fruit. He shared it without comment, pretending not to notice how hungrily Clara ate. The Double C Ranch materialized out of the darkness like something from a dream. Even by moonlight, Clara could see its scope: endless fences, numerous outbuildings, and a main house that rose 2 stories against the stars. It was an empire built from sweat and determination, a testament to what one man could achieve in this unforgiving land. James led her not to the main house, but to a smaller cabin set apart from the other buildings. This was the foreman's house before Pete moved closer to the bunkhouse, he explained, lighting a lamp. It's clean, furnished. You can stay here until you decide what you want to do. Clara stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. The cabin was simple but well maintained. A real bed with clean linens, a small stove, even curtains on the windows. After days in wagons and weeks of deterioration at her brother's hands, it seemed like a palace. I'll send Maria over in the morning, James continued. She's Pete's wife, helps with the cooking sometimes. She'll bring you some proper clothes and anything else you need. There's water in the pitcher, food in the cupboard. He turned to leave, then paused. Lock the door behind me. Anyone bothers you, you fire that shotgun over the door. I'll hear it. Mr. Colt, Clara called as he stepped outside. He looked back. Thank you. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of courage. Get some rest, Miss Bellamy. You're safe now. After he left, Clara did as instructed, barring the door before collapsing on the bed. For the first time in days, she was alone, clean, and unafraid. The tears came then, for her parents, for the brothers who'd betrayed her, for the other women still trapped in Morrison's compound, for the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. Outside. James Colt stood on the porch of his empty house, looking out over his vast holdings. He'd built all this after losing everything that mattered, throwing himself into work to avoid feeling, but tonight, something had shifted. That girl, Clara, with her defiant eyes and unbroken spirit, had awakened something he'd thought buried with his family. He didn't know what would come of it. Perhaps she'd take his offer of money and disappear, eager to put this nightmare behind her. Or perhaps she'd stay, bringing life back to a house that had known too much death. Either way, he'd done what he could to balance the scales in a world that too often crushed the innocent. As the moon traced its path across the sky, 2 wounded souls rested under the same stars, neither knowing that fate had just woven their lives together in ways that would transform them both. The West was indeed wild and cruel, but sometimes, in its vast spaces, it also offered redemption. The morning sun filtered through the cabin's curtains, painting golden stripes across the wooden floor. Clara woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the comfort of a real bed and the absence of fear. For a heartbeat, she thought she was home again, before memory crashed over her like cold water. But this wasn't Morrison's compound. She was at the Double C Ranch, under the protection of a man who'd paid gold for her freedom rather than her servitude. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Clara, it's Maria." Clara rose stiffly, her body protesting the accumulated abuse of recent days. She opened the door to find a plump Mexican woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands. Holding a basket of provisions, "Ay, pobrecita," Maria murmured, taking in Clara's bruised face and tangled hair. "Come, let me help you, mister." James said you would need tending. Over the next hour, Maria worked her motherly magic. She heated water for a proper bath, helped Clara wash her hair, applied salve to her wounds, and produced clean clothing, simple calico dresses that fit reasonably well. "These were mine when I was younger," Maria explained, adjusting the hem. "Before too many of Pete's biscuits. Say," she laughed warmly, and Clara found herself smiling for the first time in days. As Clara ate the breakfast Maria prepared, eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey, the older woman chatted, filling the silence with gentle conversation about the ranch, the workers, the rhythm of life here. "Mr. James, he is a good man," Maria said carefully, "but very sad since he lost his family. He works too hard, eats too little, keeps to himself. The house, it needs warmth again. You understand?" Clara understood all too well the weight of loss, though she kept her own grief locked away. "He said I could work in the house if I wanted, or leave. And what do you want, Mia?" The question hung in the air. What did she want? Safety, certainly. Purpose, perhaps even a chance to heal, though that seemed an impossible luxury. "I know how to work," Clara said finally. "I can cook, clean, tend gardens. I'm good with horses too." Maria beamed. "Then you will do well here. Come, I will show you the big house." The main house was even more impressive in daylight. 2 stories of solid construction with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, Clara's breath caught. Fine furniture sat covered in dust sheets. Paintings hung on walls that hadn't seen care in too long, and everything spoke of wealth tempered by abandonment. 3 years, Maria said sadly, running a finger through the dust on a side table. 3 years since anyone really lived here. Mr. James sleeps in his study most nights, takes meals in the kitchen when he remembers to eat at all. They spent the morning touring the house, Maria explaining the routine that once was and could be again. Clara found herself drawn to the details, the quality of the curtains, the books in the library, the copper pots hanging in the kitchen. This was a home waiting to live again. As they worked, opening windows to air out stuffiness, Clara caught glimpses of James through the windows. He moved among his men with easy authority, directing work on fences, checking horses, consulting with Pete about something that required much gesturing toward the horizon. He never looked toward the house. "Does he always work so hard?" Clara asked. "Every day," Maria confirmed. "Dawn to past dark. Work is his way of forgetting, I think." Clara understood that too. She threw herself into cleaning, starting with the kitchen. Physical labor was a blessing. It kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to dark places. By afternoon, the kitchen gleamed, and she'd started preparation for a proper dinner. "You don't have to do all this today," Maria protested. "You should rest, heal." "I need to be useful," Clara said simply. "It helps." Maria squeezed her shoulder in understanding before departing to tend her own household. As the sun began its descent, Clara heard boots on the porch. James appeared in the kitchen doorway, hat in hand, looking surprised to find her there. He'd washed at the pump outside, but dust still clung to his clothes, and weariness lined his face. "Miss Bellamy, Maria said you were settling in, but I didn't expect—" He gestured at the transformed kitchen. "I hope you don't mind." Clara said quickly, "I wanted to start earning my keep." "There's no debt between us," he said firmly. "I told you that." "I know, but I need to work. I need—" She struggled to find the words. "I need to feel useful, to have purpose." Something in his expression softened. "I understand that. Lord knows I do." "What's that smell?" "Beef stew," Clara said, lifting the pot lid. "Maria showed me where everything was. There's fresh bread too, and I found some preserved peaches for dessert." James stood frozen for a moment, and Clara worried she'd overstepped. Then he cleared his throat roughly. "I usually just eat something cold at my desk." "Well," Clara said, summoning courage she didn't quite feel. "The dining room isn't ready yet, but the kitchen table is clean. You could eat here, if you'd like, unless you prefer to be alone." He hesitated so long she was sure he'd refuse. Then, a hot meal would be welcome. She served him at the scrubbed wooden table, then turned to busy herself at the stove, giving him privacy. But he surprised her again. Would you join me? Seems foolish for you to wait to eat alone. Clara sat across from him, and they ate in companionable silence. The stew was good. She'd always been a competent cook, and James ate with an appetite that suggested he'd been living on jerky and cold biscuits more often than not. This is excellent, he said finally. Thank you. It's nothing fancy. My mother taught me. She said a good meal could heal almost anything. The words slipped out before she could stop them, bringing with them a wave of grief. She sounds wise, James said gently. When did you lose her? 2 winters ago. Lung fever. Papa followed soon after. Heart gave out, the doctor said, but I think he just couldn't live without her. Clara stared at her plate. That's when my brothers changed. Or maybe they just showed who they really were. I'm sorry. The words were simple but sincere. Losing family, it changes everything. They finished the meal quietly, but the silence had shifted from awkward to understanding. As Clara cleared the dishes, James stood. Thank you for this, for the meal, for... He gestured vaguely at the clean kitchen. It's been a long time since this place felt alive. After he left, Clara finished cleaning up, then stepped out onto the porch. The evening was spectacular, stars beginning to emerge in a sky painted purple and gold, the land stretching endlessly in all directions. She could see why James had built his empire here. There was a freedom in all this space, a chance to be more than what birth and circumstance had dictated. Over the following days, a routine developed. Clara rose early, prepared breakfast, and left it warming for James before he headed out. She worked through the house systematically, cleaning, organizing, bringing order to chaos. Maria helped when she could, teaching Clara the preferences of a household she'd once helped run. James appeared for dinner each evening, drawn perhaps by the smell of cooking or the glow of lamplight in windows too long dark. Their conversations remained tentative at first. Weather, ranch business, safe topics. But gradually, they began to share more. Clara learned that James had come west as a young man with nothing but ambition and a gift for reading land and cattle. He'd built the Double C through sheer determination, surviving droughts, rustlers, and market crashes that ruined lesser men. He'd met his wife Catherine in San Antonio. She was a banker's daughter who'd chosen love over comfort, following him to this wild place. In return, Clara shared stories of her own childhood, the small joys of their modest farm, her love of horses, the way her father had taught her to read using whatever books they could find. She even spoke of her brothers before bitterness poisoned them, though those memories brought more pain than comfort. One evening, as she served apple pie made from the ranch's own orchards, James said suddenly, "The men are talking." Clara's hand stilled. About me? About how the house smells like baking again, how there are curtains in the windows and flowers on the table. A slight smile tugged at his mouth. Pete says it's about time this place remembered it was a home. I hope I haven't overstepped. You haven't. His voice was firm. It's good. Better than good. I'd forgotten how much the small things matter. That night, Clara stood at her cabin window, looking toward the main house. For the first time, James had lingered after dinner, accepting coffee and sitting on the porch to watch the stars emerge. She'd sat in a rocking chair nearby, and they talked about inconsequential things, the best time to plant vegetables, whether the rains would come early this year, the personalities of various horses. It was such a normal evening, so quietly domestic, that it made her heart ache. She was beginning to heal here, to find pieces of herself she'd thought lost forever. The work helped, giving structure to her days and purpose to her movements. But it was more than that. It was the unexpected kindness of a man who could have taken advantage but chose protection instead. It was Maria's motherly care, Pete's gruff approval, the way the ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully when she passed. She was also, she admitted to herself, beginning to notice things about James' colt that had nothing to do with gratitude. The way his rare smiles transformed his face, his gentle hands with horses despite his strength, the loneliness he carried like a shadow, so similar to her own. Dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position. She was here on sufferance, rescued from a fate worse than death but not truly free. Not yet, perhaps not ever, given what had been taken from her. Her innocence about the world's cruelty, her trust in family, her sense of safety. But as she prepared for bed in her cozy cabin, Clara allowed herself a moment of hope. The West had taken everything from her, but perhaps, in its vast and unforgiving spaces, it might also offer redemption, not just for her, but for the sad, kind man who'd given her shelter when the world had turned its back. Tomorrow she would continue bringing life back to his house, and maybe, in small ways and quiet moments, they could both remember what it meant to live rather than simply survive. The November morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost gilding the grass like scattered diamonds. Clara had been at the Double C for nearly 6 weeks now, and the rhythm of ranch life had become as natural as breathing. She was kneading bread dough when she heard the commotion outside. Angry voices, the sound of horses stamping nervously. Through the kitchen window, she saw James facing down Bill Hancock, one of the ranch hands who'd always made her uncomfortable with his lingering stares and crude comments when James wasn't around. Maria had warned her about him. That one drinks too much and thinks too little. She'd said, "The lady asked you to move aside," James was saying, his voice dangerously quiet. "I won't ask again." Clara's heart sank. She'd encountered Hancock near the well that morning, and when she'd politely asked him to step aside so she could draw water, he'd moved closer instead, backing her against the stone rim. She'd managed to slip away and return to the house, hoping to avoid trouble. "Just being friendly to the pretty lady?" Hancock slurred, clearly still drunk from the night before. No harm in being neighborly to a woman who knows about being friendly, if you catch my meaning. The implications in his words made Clara's cheeks burn with shame and anger. Before she could fully process what was happening, James had moved. One moment he was standing still. The next, Hancock was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. "Get up," James ordered coldly. "Get your things and get off my land. If I see you near the Double C again, I'll put a bullet in you." Hancock struggled to his feet, rage and humiliation warring on his face. "All this over some used goods you bought from Morrison? Everyone knows what she—" The click of James cocking his revolver cut through the morning air like thunder. "Choose your next words very carefully. Hancock, they might be your last." The ranch hand paled, finally seeming to understand the depth of his mistake. He backed away, hands raised, then turned and stumbled toward the bunkhouse. Within an hour, he was gone, riding away with his possessions and his final pay, which James had insisted on despite Pete's protests. Clara found James afterward, standing by the corral, his knuckles bloody. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He turned to her, and the protective fury in his eyes made her breath catch. "Yes, I did. No one speaks about you that way. No one." But what he said, what everyone must think, "I don't give a damn what anyone thinks," James said fiercely. "You're under my protection. Clara, that means something here." She looked at him, this man who'd saved her not once but twice now, and felt something shift in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded curtly and started to walk away, then paused. "Did he hurt you this morning?" "No, just frightened me a little." His jaw tightened. "It won't happen again. I'll make sure the men understand." That evening, Clara prepared dinner with extra care, thick steaks, roasted vegetables from the garden she'd been tending, and a chocolate cake she'd been saving for a special occasion. When James appeared, she noticed he'd changed into a clean shirt and his hair was still damp from washing. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, then noticed the table. She'd used the good china from the dining room, even found candles to light. "I wanted to thank you," she explained, "for today, for everything." They ate slowly, savoring the meal and each other's company. The conversation flowed easier now, weeks of shared dinners having worn away the initial awkwardness. James told her about his plans for expanding the herd, and Clara shared her ideas for a larger vegetable garden come spring. "You're planning for spring?" he asked, something unreadable in his voice. Clara's hand stilled on her fork. I suppose I assumed, if you'd rather I leave." "No." The word came quick and firm. "That's not what I meant. I'm glad you're thinking of staying." After dinner, instead of retreating to his study as usual, James lingered. "Would you like to see something?" he asked suddenly, curious. Clara followed him outside. The moon was rising full and bright, casting everything in silver. James led her to the barn, where he lit a lantern and guided her to a stall near the back. Inside was the most beautiful horse Clara had ever seen, a golden palomino mare with a white mane that fell like silk. "She arrived yesterday," James said. "Bred her myself. Best bloodlines in the territory. I thought, well, you mentioned you missed riding." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "James, I couldn't—" "Yes, you could. Every rider needs a good horse. She's yours if you want her." Overwhelmed, Clara entered the stall slowly, letting the mare smell her hand before stroking the velvet nose. The horse whickered softly, already accepting her. "What will you name her?" James asked, his voice warm with something that might have been affection. "Dawn," Clara said immediately. "Because she's golden like sunrise, like new beginnings." When she turned to thank him, she found James watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. They were standing very close in the small stall, and she could smell his soap, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Clara," he said, her name rough on his lips. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then voices from outside broke the spell, ranch hands returning from town. James stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should go," he said, "early morning tomorrow," but he paused at the barn door. Looking back, "Would you ride with me Sunday? I could show you the northern pastures. They're beautiful this time of year." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. After he left, she stayed with Dawn, her heart racing. Something had almost happened in that lantern-lit moment, something that both thrilled and terrified her. Sunday came clear and cold. Clara wore her best riding skirt, another gift from Maria's younger days, and met James at the barn just after dawn. He helped her saddle Dawn, his hands brushing hers as he adjusted the stirrups, each touch sending sparks through her gloves. They rode out as the sun painted the mountains pink and gold, following trails through landscape that stole Clara's breath. James was a different man out here, relaxed and open, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the ranch's early days. They stopped at a creek lined with cottonwoods, their leaves turned gold by autumn's touch, as the horses drank. James and Clara sat on a fallen log, sharing the lunch she'd packed. "I used to bring Catherine here," he said suddenly. She loved the way the light came through the leaves. It was the first time he'd voluntarily spoken of his wife. Clara waited, sensing the importance of the moment. "I thought I'd die too, after," he continued, staring at the rippling water. "Wanted to, for a while. Pete kept me going, kept the ranch running while I was lost in the darkness. Then slowly, work became my reason to get up each day, building something, even if I had no one to leave it to." "James," Clara said softly, "but he wasn't finished. Then you arrived, and suddenly the house smells like bread again. There are flowers on the table and laughter in the kitchen. The men whistle while they work because the boss isn't a bear anymore. You brought life back to this place. Clara, to me." He turned to her then, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. Without thinking, she reached out, touching his face gently. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "I'm broken," she whispered. "What my brothers did, what almost happened. I don't know if I'll ever be whole again." "We're all broken," James said. "The trick is finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours." He leaned closer, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his lips brushed hers, soft, tentative, asking permission rather than taking. Clara's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into the kiss, feeling something inside her that had been frozen begin to thaw. When they parted, James rested his forehead against hers. "I won't rush you," he promised. "We have time." The ride back was quiet but charged with new awareness. Every glance carried weight. Every accidental touch sparked electricity. As they approached the ranch, reality intruded. The watching eyes of the hands, the assumptions people would make, the complicated nature of their situation. That evening, as Clara served dinner, things felt different but not uncomfortably so. When their fingers brushed as she handed him his plate, James caught her hand briefly, squeezing gently before letting go. Such a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. After dinner, they sat on the porch as had become their custom. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the desert sky. "People will talk," Clara said eventually. "More than they already do." "Let them," James replied. "I've never cared for gossip." "But your reputation—" "My reputation can handle it. The question is what you want. Clara, not what others think, not what's proper or expected. What do you want?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars. "I want to feel safe again. I want to build something good from all this pain. I want—" She turned to look at him. "I want to see where this leads. With you." James smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "Then that's what we'll do, one day at a time." As Clara walked back to her cabin that night, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, real, tangible hope for a future that might hold joy as well as sorrow, love as well as loss. The path ahead was uncertain, complicated by their past wounds and present circumstances. But for the first time since her world had shattered, Clara believed she might find happiness again. In the main house, James stood at his bedroom window, watching until Clara's cabin went dark. His heart, so long dormant, beat with new purpose. She'd awakened something in him he'd thought dead forever. The capacity to care, to protect, to love. It wouldn't be easy, building a life from the ashes of their separate griefs. But nothing worthwhile in the West ever was. The December wind howled across the plains, bringing with it the season's first serious snowstorm. Clara watched from the kitchen window as the world disappeared behind a curtain of white, worry gnawing at her chest. James had ridden out that morning to check on the herd in the north pasture, promising to return before the weather turned. But the storm had come faster than expected, and now darkness was falling. 3 weeks had passed since their ride to the creek, since that first tender kiss that had changed everything between them. They'd moved slowly, carefully, like dancers learning new steps. James would find excuses to linger in the kitchen, helping dry dishes or carrying firewood. Clara would bring coffee to his study in the evenings, and they'd talk until the fire burned low. There had been more kisses, stolen moments in the pantry, gentle goodnights on the porch, but also a strange distance, as if James was holding himself back. "He knows these storms," Maria said, joining Clara at the window. She'd come to help prepare supper, but both women knew James wouldn't make it back tonight, not in this weather. He'll shelter somewhere safe. But Clara couldn't shake her fear. The memory of finding her father half frozen after being caught in a blizzard haunted her. She tried to focus on cooking, but her hands trembled as she chopped vegetables. Near midnight, she gave up pretending to sleep. Wrapped in a thick shawl, she sat by the kitchen window, a lamp burning low on the table. The storm had worsened, wind rattling the windows and snow piling against the doors. Every sound made her heart leap, hoping it was James returning, when the door suddenly burst open, bringing a blast of Arctic air and swirling snow. Clara cried out. James stumbled in, so covered in ice he was barely recognizable. His lips were blue, his movements sluggish. "James!" She rushed to him, helping him to a chair by the stove. His clothes were frozen stiff, his hands like ice when she pulled off his gloves. "We need to get you warm." She worked quickly, efficiently, fear lending her strength. She pulled off his frozen boots, wrapped him in blankets, stoked the stove until it roared. When he tried to speak through chattering teeth, She hushed him, forcing hot coffee between his lips. "Can you make it upstairs?" she asked when some color returned to his face. "You need to get out of these wet clothes." He nodded, and she helped him up the stairs to his bedroom, a room she'd cleaned but never entered when he was home. She lit the fireplace, laid out dry clothes, then hesitated at the door. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. "Stay, please." She turned back to find him struggling with his frozen shirt buttons. Without thinking, she went to help, her fingers working the buttons free. The intimacy of the moment, undressing him, even from necessity, made her cheeks burn. When his shirt fell away, revealing the broad expanse of his chest marked by old scars. She tried to step back, but he caught her hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have been back hours ago. You must have been worried. I was terrified," she admitted, tears suddenly threatening. "I thought I couldn't bear it if something happened to you." He pulled her close, and she buried her face against his chest, not caring that he was still cold and damp. "I'm here," he murmured into her hair. "I'm safe." When she finally pulled back, something had shifted in his expression. The careful distance he'd been maintaining was gone, replaced by raw need. "Clara," he said, her name a question and a plea. She answered by rising on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her relief and fear and growing love into the contact. This kiss was different from the gentle explorations of recent weeks. It was desperate, hungry, alive. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "You should go," James said, though his hands didn't release her. I won't take advantage." "You're not," Clara said firmly. "James, I care for you. More than care, these past weeks. Being here with you, it's shown me that life can be good again, that I can feel things I thought were lost forever." He cupped her face gently. "You've given me back my heart. Clara Bellamy, I love you. Lord help me. I've tried not to, but I do." The words hung between them, momentous and terrifying. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can be what you need, after everything that's happened." "You're already everything I need," he interrupted. "Just as you are, brave and kind and so beautiful it takes my breath away. But I won't rush you. If you need time." She silenced him with another kiss, this one slow and deep and full of promise. When it ended, she stepped back, her decision made. "I should go," she said softly. "You need rest, and if I stay—" She let the sentence hang, seeing her own desire reflected in his eyes. She made it to the door before his voice stopped her. "Clara, this storm will likely last days. You shouldn't stay in the cabin alone. It's not safe in this weather." She looked back at him, understanding the offer implicit in his words. "Where would you have me stay?" "Wherever you're comfortable. The guest room is made up. Or—" He paused, vulnerability clear on his face. "Or you could stay here, just to sleep," he added quickly. "I would never presume." "I know," she said, and she did. This man who'd bought her freedom, who'd protected her, who'd given her back her dignity, he would never take what wasn't freely given. "Let me bank the kitchen fires. I'll be back." When she returned, James had changed into dry clothes and built up the bedroom fire until the room was warm and golden. He'd pulled back the covers on both sides of the large bed, and Clara's heart raced at the intimacy of it. She'd brought her nightgown and wrapper from the cabin, changing quickly behind the screen in the corner. When she emerged, James was already in bed, watching her with dark eyes. She slipped in beside him, acutely aware of his warmth, his presence. For a moment they lay still, a careful distance between them. "Come here," he said softly, opening his arms. She went willingly, curling against his side, her head on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. His arms came around her, holding her close but making no other moves. "Tell me about your dreams," he said into the darkness. "What you want from life." So she did, talking about gardens and horses, about children laughing in the house again, about building something lasting in this wild land. He shared his own hopes, expanding the ranch not just for profit but to create jobs for good men, building a school for the area's children, leaving a legacy of more than just land and cattle. They talked until Clara's eyes grew heavy, safe and warm in the circle of his arms. Just before sleep took her, she felt him press a kiss to her forehead. "I love you, Clara," he whispered, thinking her asleep. "I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of you." She wanted to tell him he already was, but exhaustion pulled her under. She woke to pale morning light and the feeling of being watched. James was propped on one elbow, studying her face with such tenderness it made her throat tight. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning." She was suddenly aware of how intimate their position was, her nightgown twisted around her legs, her hair spread across his pillow, their bodies pressed close under the warm quilts. "The storm's passed," he said, gesturing toward the window where weak sunlight struggled through. "Though we're snowed in for a day or two at least." "I should get up," Clara said, though she made no move to do so. "Start breakfast. Or you could stay here a while longer," James suggested, his hand tracing lazy circles on her back. "The world won't end if breakfast is late." She looked up at him, seeing desire but also patience in his eyes. Always. He gave her the choice. It was that respect, that constant care for her autonomy, that decided her. "James," she said, reaching up to touch his face, I think I'm ready for more. With you." His hand stilled. "Clara, are you sure? We have all the time in the world. I don't want you to feel—" She kissed him, pouring all her certainty into the gesture. When they parted, she said, "I'm sure. I love you. James Colt. I want to be yours in every way." What followed was gentle and patient, full of whispered endearments and careful exploration. James treated her like precious glass, worshipping her with hands and lips until she felt treasured, cherished, loved beyond measure. When they finally joined, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, not from pain but from the overwhelming rightness of it. Afterward, they lay entwined, hearts slowly settling. James traced patterns on her bare shoulder, his expression soft with wonder. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "I know it's soon, and Lord knows you deserve better than a hasty proposal in bed. But I can't stand another day of you living in that cabin, of people questioning your place here. Be my wife, Clara. Make this house a home again." Clara pushed up to look at him, searching his face. "You want to marry me? Even knowing how I came to be here?" "Especially knowing that," he said fiercely. "You survived something that would break most people. You're the strongest woman I know, and I'd be honored to call you my wife, if you'll have me." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, James, nothing would make me happier." He kissed her then, deep and possessive, and she knew that whatever storms lay ahead, weather or whispers, gossip or ghosts, they would face them together. The girl who'd been sold by her brothers was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd chosen her own fate, who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances, who would build a future from the ashes of the past. Outside, the snow-covered world sparkled like diamonds, a blank canvas waiting for new stories to be written. And in the warmth of their bed, two wounded souls began the beautiful work of healing together, their love a testament to the redemptive power of choice, respect, and the courage to trust again. The wedding took place on a crisp January morning in the small chapel at the edge of town. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Maria's skilled hands, while James stood tall in his finest black suit. Only a handful of witnesses attended: Pete and Maria, Doc Henderson, who'd become a friend, and surprisingly, Judge Morrison from the county seat who'd ridden 2 days to officiate. "You sure about this, son?" the judge had asked James privately. "There's been talk." "I've never been more sure of anything," James had replied firmly, "and any man who speaks ill of my wife will answer to me." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When James slipped the gold band on Clara's finger, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, his hands were steady, but his voice broke slightly on the vows. Clara's eyes shone with tears as she promised to love, honor, and cherish, knowing how much those words meant after everything they'd endured. But their joy was short-lived. 3 weeks after the wedding, as Clara was returning from town with supplies, she saw them, 2 familiar figures on horseback, waiting at the ranch gate. Her blood turned to ice. Tom and Samuel Bellamy sat their horses like vultures, greed plain on their weathered faces. They'd lost weight, their clothes were shabby, and desperation clung to them like smoke. "Well, well," Tom drawled as Clara's wagon approached. "Look at our little sister, all dressed up like a lady." "What are you doing here?" Clara's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Heard you married rich," Samuel said, spitting tobacco juice. "Figured family should share in good fortune." "You're not my family," Clara said coldly. "You sold that right for 20 pieces of gold." Tom's face darkened. "Now that ain't no way to talk. Not when we know things about you that your fancy husband might not want getting around." Before Clara could respond, the sound of approaching hooves made all 3 turn. James rode up fast, Pete and several ranch hands behind him. His face was carved from stone as he positioned his horse between Clara and her brothers. "Gentlemen," he said, though the word dripped with irony, "I believe you're trespassing." "Just visiting family," Tom said, but his bravado faltered under James's cold stare. "Mrs. Colt has no family here," James said flatly. "You lost any claim to that when you sold her like livestock. Now get off my land before I forget I'm a civilized man." Samuel, always the greedier of the 2, leaned forward. "Maybe folks around here would like to know exactly what kind of woman you married. Colt, where she's been, what she's—" The click of multiple hammers being cocked silenced him. Pete and the ranch hands had drawn their weapons, faces grim. "Choose your next words very carefully," James said softly. "My wife's honor is worth more than your worthless lives." But Clara had heard enough. She climbed down from the wagon and walked past James, her chin high. "You want money? Is that it? You spent what you got for selling me and now you want more. You owe us." Tom started, but Clara cut him off. "I owe you nothing, but I'll make you a deal." She looked at James. "With my husband's permission, I'll give you what you first sold me for, 20 gold pieces. But you'll sign a paper saying you'll never come here again. Never speak my name, never acknowledge knowing me. You'll disappear and stay gone." "Clara, you don't have to," James began. "I want to," she said firmly. "I want to buy my freedom from them completely." The brothers exchanged glances, greed warring with pride. "Finally." Tom nodded. "Double it. 40 pieces. 20. Clara said coldly. "The same price you put on my life. Take it and go, or leave with nothing but the promise that if you ever come near me again, my husband will kill you." In the end, they took it. Judge Morrison, who'd extended his stay, drew up the papers. The brothers signed, took their gold, and rode away without a backward glance. Clara stood on the porch, watching them disappear, feeling the last chains of her past fall away. "Are you all right?" James asked, coming up behind her. "I'm free," she said wonderingly. "Truly free." He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You always were. You just needed to believe it." That evening, James organized something Clara hadn't expected. A proper wedding reception. The entire ranch gathered in the main house, which Clara had decorated with winter greenery and candles. Maria had outdone herself with the food, and Doc Henderson had brought his fiddle. "I wanted to do this right," James explained as he led Clara in their first dance as husband and wife. "To show everyone that you're not just my wife, but the mistress of the Double C, my partner in everything." As they danced, the ranch hands and their families watched with approval. These men had seen the change in their boss since Clara arrived, the smiles that came easier, the fairness tempered with warmth, the way the big house had become a home again. They'd closed ranks against outside gossip, fiercely protective of the woman who'd brought light back to the Double C. "Speech!" someone called out, and others took up the cry. James looked at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. He raised his glass, his free hand holding Clara's. "When I built this ranch," he began, "I thought I was building a monument to ambition. I learned too late that land and cattle mean nothing without someone to share them with. I lost that once and thought I'd never have it again." He looked down at Clara, his eyes soft. "Then God saw fit to send me an angel disguised as a woman in need. She didn't just save herself, she saved me too my wife, Clara Colt, who makes every sunrise worth seeing." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in town. Clara blushed but raised her own glass. "To the Double C," she said, "to the family we've all built here together, and to my husband, who showed me that love could grow even in the hardest ground." Later, as the party continued around them, James pulled Clara aside. "I have something for you." He led her to his study, where a leather folder lay on the desk. "Open it." Inside were legal papers making her co-owner of the ranch, giving her full rights to everything he possessed. "James," she breathed, "You don't have to do this?" "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "You're my wife, my partner. If something happens to me, I want to know you're protected, really protected, not dependent on anyone's charity or goodwill." Clara threw her arms around him, overwhelmed. From sold property to property owner, the transformation was complete. "I love you," she whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." "Don't be frightened," he murmured against her hair. "We've both walked through hell and survived. Together, we're stronger than anything life can throw at us." They returned to the party, where Pete was regaling the crowd with stories of James's early days on the ranch. Clara found herself drawn into conversations with the ranch wives, discussing plans for a spring garden, a school for the children, maybe even a church social. As the evening wound down, Clara stood at the window watching snow begin to fall again. But this time, instead of fear, she felt only peace. The house was warm and full of laughter. Her husband stood strong beside her, and the future stretched out full of promise. "No regrets?" James asked, joining her at the window. "None," she said, leaning into his warmth. "I would walk through fire again to end up here with you." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "You'll never have to walk through fire again. I promise you that. From now on, we face everything together." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white. But inside the Double C ranch house, warmth and love held sway. Clara Bellamy Colt, once sold as chattel, stood in her own home, surrounded by people who respected her, protected by laws that recognized her worth, and loved by a man who saw her as an equal. The girl who'd been betrayed by blood had found something better, a chosen family, a earned place, and a love that would stand as firm as the mountains that watched over the ranch. In the Wild West, where might often made right, she had discovered that the greatest strength came not from guns or gold, but from the courage to trust, to love, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of destruction. Spring arrived at the Double C with an explosion of wildflowers and new calves, bringing with it a season of growth and change. Clara had thrown herself into ranch operations with the same determination she'd brought to healing the house. She rode out with James each morning, learning to read the land, judge cattle, and understand the complex business of ranching. "You're a natural," James said one evening as they went over the ledgers together. "Better head for figures than I am." Clara smiled, making notes about feed costs. "Father always said I had a mind for numbers, though he never imagined I'd use it for something like this." Their partnership had deepened in every way. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of a woman's involvement in operations, had come to respect Clara's quick mind and fair judgment. She'd implemented new systems for tracking expenses and had even negotiated a better deal with the feed supplier in town. But it was their private moments Clara treasured most. Quiet evenings by the fire, James reading aloud while she mended clothes. Dawn rides to check the herds, racing across the plains with wild abandon, and the nights, the nights when they came together with a passion that still took her breath away. One particular evening in May, they were in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when Clara heard familiar laughter from the house. Through the open door, she saw a woman on the porch, tall, elegant, with rich auburn hair and a traveling dress that screamed Eastern money. James went rigid beside her. "Victoria," he breathed. Clara's stomach dropped. She knew that name, Catherine's sister, who'd written after the funeral but never visited. Until now. "James," Victoria called out, spotting them. "There you are. I've come for a visit. Surely you won't turn away family." They walked to the house, James's hand finding Clara's as if to anchor himself. Up close, Victoria was even more beautiful, with Catherine's same delicate features but a harder edge to her smile. "You must be the new wife," Victoria said, her gaze sweeping over Clara's work dress and dusty boots. "How quaint." "Clara, this is Victoria Hartley," James said stiffly. "Catherine's sister. Victoria, my wife, Clara. Charmed," Victoria said in a tone that suggested otherwise. "James, we simply must catch up. It's been far too long." Over the next days, Victoria made her presence felt like a poison seeping into their happiness. She monopolized James's time with tears and memories, constantly bringing up Catherine and how things used to be. She made subtle digs at Clara's background, her lack of formal education, her rough manners. "Catherine never would have worn men's trousers," Victoria said one morning as Clara prepared to ride out. "She was a true lady." "Good thing I'm not trying to be Catherine then," Clara replied evenly, though the words stung. The worst came one evening when Clara returned from town to find Victoria in her bedroom, hers and James's, holding a portrait of Catherine that had been stored away. "This should be displayed," Victoria said. "James shouldn't forget his first love, his true love." Clara's hands clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Please leave our bedroom, now." Victoria's eyes glittered with malice. "Our bedroom? How cozy." "Tell me, does he ever call out her name? In the dark? Do you wonder if he's thinking of her?" "Get out," Clara said, her control finally snapping. "Get out of this room and tomorrow. Get out of this house. You can't order me around like one of your servants." Victoria sneered. "I'm family, real family, not some rescued saloon girl playing at being a lady." The slap echoed through the room. Victoria staggered back, hand to her reddening cheek, shock replacing smugness. "I said get out," Clara repeated quietly. "And if you ever speak about me that way again, a slap will be the least of your worries." Victoria fled, and Clara sank onto the bed. Shaking, she looked at Catherine's portrait, a lovely woman with gentle eyes, and felt a wave of inadequacy. How could she compete with a ghost, with a true lady who'd never known hardship or shame? She was still sitting there when James found her. "Clara," Victoria said. He stopped, seeing the portrait. "Why is this out?" "Your sister-in-law thought it should be displayed," Clara said dully. "So you don't forget." James crossed the room in 2 strides, taking Clara's face in his hands. "Look at me. Really look at me." She met his eyes, seeing anger, but not at her. "I loved Catherine," he said. "I won't lie about that, but she's gone, and what we had is gone with her. You are my wife, my heart, my future. Not her replacement. God, never that. You're Clara, and I love you for exactly who you are. But I'm not refined like her. I don't know proper etiquette or, you know how to birth a calf at 3 in the morning. You can balance ledgers and negotiate with suppliers. You make the best biscuits in the territory and you ride like you were born in the saddle." His thumb stroked her cheeks. "You survived hell and came out stronger. You think I care about etiquette compared to that?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. She implied you think of Catherine when we..." James's expression turned thunderous. "She said what?" He pulled Clara against him fiercely. "Never, not once. When I'm with you, there's only you. Your laugh, your strength, your passion. Catherine was my past, but you're my everything." That night, Their lovemaking held a desperate edge. James worshipped every inch of her, whispering her name like a prayer, proving with touch what words couldn't fully convey. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, he made a decision. "Victoria leaves tomorrow," he said. "I'll give her money for a hotel in town, but she's not welcome here anymore. She's family. Your family, the only family that matters." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I should have sent her away the moment she arrived. I'm sorry." The next morning, Victoria's departure was less graceful than her arrival. Faced with James's implacable will, she showed her true colors, screaming about ingratitude and how Catherine would be horrified. But James simply had Pete drive her to town, deaf to her protests. "You'll regret this," Victoria shouted as the wagon pulled away. "When that little nobody shows her true nature, you'll wish you'd listened." James turned away without a word, taking Clara's hand. "Come on, we have work to do." They rode out together, checking the eastern pastures where the spring grass grew thick. As they paused to water the horses at a stream, Clara felt a wave of nausea hit her. She'd been feeling off for days, but had attributed it to the stress of Victoria's visit. "Are you all right?" James asked, noticing her pallor. "I'm fine, just—" She swayed, and he caught her. "That's it, we're going back. I'm calling Doc Henderson." Despite her protests, James was immovable. Doc Henderson arrived within hours, examining Clara while James paced outside like a caged cat. When the doctor emerged, he was smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Colt. You're going to be a father." James froze, the color draining from his face. Father?" "About 3 months along. I'd say Mrs. Colt is in fine health, though she needs to take things easier." The doctor patted James's shoulder. "Breathe, son. This is good news." James burst into the room where Clara sat on the bed, looking nervous. "Is it true?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Are you happy?" "I know after what happened before." He fell to his knees beside the bed, taking her hands. "Happy, Clara, His voice broke. "I thought I'd never have this chance again. A child, our child." He pressed his face against her stomach. Thank you for giving me back everything I thought I'd lost." Clara ran her fingers through his hair, her own tears falling freely. "I was so scared to tell you, afraid it would bring back painful memories." He looked up at her. "The only pain would be not sharing this with you. Every moment, every joy, every fear. I want to face it all with you." That evening, as news spread through the ranch, celebration erupted. Maria wept with joy. Pete broke out his private stock of whiskey, and the ranch hands took turns congratulating their boss and his wife. "To the next generation of Colts," Pete toasted, raising his glass. "May they have their mother's beauty and their father's stubbornness." "Hear, hear!" the crowd roared, as Clara stood in the circle of James's arms, watching their extended family celebrate. She marveled at how far she'd come, from a girl sold by her brothers to a woman loved, respected, and carrying new life. The West had taken everything from her, but it had given back tenfold. "No regrets?" James murmured in her ear, echoing his question from their wedding night. "None," she assured him, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Though you might want to ask me again when I'm the size of a barn." He chuckled, his hands spreading protectively over her still flat stomach. "You'll be beautiful. You're always beautiful." Outside, the sun set over their land in a blaze of glory, painting the sky in shades of hope, and in the heart of the Double C Ranch, two souls who'd found each other against all odds, prepared to welcome the ultimate symbol of their love new life born from ashes. Proof that even in the harshest landscape, beauty and joy could bloom. The drought came in July, turning the grasslands brown and the creek beds to cracked earth. Clara, now 7 months pregnant, watched from the porch as James and the men struggled to keep the cattle alive, driving them to the few remaining water sources. The strain showed on everyone, but especially on James, who carried the weight of every decision. Then came the day everything changed. James was moving cattle to the North Spring when his horse spooked at a rattlesnake. The fall was bad. Pete found him hours later, unconscious, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Get him inside," Doc Henderson ordered grimly after his examination. "That leg's broken bad, and he's got a concussion. He needs complete rest for weeks, maybe months." "Months?" James tried to sit up from the bed, only to fall back with a groan. "The ranch, the drought, I can't—" "You can and you will," Clara said firmly, pushing him back against the pillows. "Or you'll be no use to anyone." With James bedridden, the weight of the Double C fell on Clara's shoulders. Despite her advanced pregnancy and the protests of everyone around her, she stepped into the breach. She'd learned well in the months of working beside James, and now that knowledge would be tested. "Pete, we need to move the main herd to Skeleton Canyon," she said the next morning, spreading maps on James's bedside table so he could see. "There's still water there from the underground spring. That's rustler territory." Pete warned. "Too dangerous. Then we post guards. We lose more cattle to thirst than we might to thieves." She turned to James. "What do you think?" His eyes held pride despite his pain. "I think you're right. Do it." Clara threw herself into managing the crisis. She rode out each dawn despite her ungainly size, checking water sources, directing the men, making the hard decisions about which cattle to sell early despite poor prices to save the rest. She negotiated with neighboring ranches for water rights, her combination of feminine charm and steel backbone catching them off guard. "Your wife's something else," rancher Tom McCready told the bedridden James. "Drove a harder bargain than you ever did, but fair. You're a lucky man." But the stress took its toll. One evening, as Clara went over accounts by lamplight, pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, grabbing the desk edge. "Clara?" James called from the bed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she lied, breathing through the pain. "Just the baby kicking." But the pains continued, and by midnight, she couldn't hide them anymore. Maria took one look at her and sent Pete racing for Doc Henderson. "It's too early," Clara whimpered, clutching James's hand as another contraction hit. 2 months too early." "Shh," James soothed, though his face was gray with fear. "Doc's coming. You'll be fine. You're the strongest person I know." The labor was long and difficult. James, despite his injuries, refused to leave her side, holding her hand through each wave of pain. Doc Henderson worked with grim efficiency, Maria assisting, while outside the ranch hands gathered in worried clusters. As dawn broke over the parched land, a thin cry pierced the air. "It's a boy," Doc Henderson announced, but his tone was cautious. "Small, but breathing on his own. The next few days will tell." Clara reached for her son with trembling hands. He was tiny, fitting in her palms like a fragile bird. But his eyes, James's eyes, were bright and alert. "He's perfect," she whispered. "James, look at him." James touched the baby's cheek with one finger, tears streaming down his face. "What should we name him?" "Thomas," Clara said without hesitation. "Thomas James Colt, after your father and you, after his parents." James corrected softly. "The bravest souls in the territory." Little Thomas's early arrival meant Clara couldn't return to ranch work immediately, which frustrated her to no end. But as she recovered, she found ways to contribute from the house, planning, strategizing, keeping the books while nursing her son. The drought finally broke in September with a thunderstorm that had everyone dancing in the rain. James was back on his feet, though still limping. And together they surveyed their domain from the hill overlooking the ranch. "We lost some cattle," he said, "but less than most, thanks to you." "Thanks to us," Clara corrected, shifting Thomas in her arms. The baby had thrived despite his early arrival, growing round and rosy. "We're partners, remember?" How could I forget? James wrapped his arms around both of them. "You saved this place. Clara, while I was flat on my back, you held everything together." "I had a good teacher," she said, leaning into his warmth. "And I had something worth fighting for." As if in response, Thomas gurgled happily. Reaching for his father's face, James caught the tiny hand, his expression soft with wonder. "From slave to queen," he murmured. "That's what I told you that night, remember? But I was wrong." Clara looked up at him questioningly. "You were never a slave. Not really. They tried to make you one. But your spirit was always free, and you're not a queen either. You're something better. You're the heart of this place, the true strength of the double C." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're the woman who taught me that love could bloom even in the hardest ground, that families could be built from ashes, that second chances were possible." "We taught each other," Clara said, her own eyes damp. "I was just a broken girl when you found me." "No," James said firmly. "You were a survivor looking for a place to plant new roots. I just had the good sense to offer good soil." They stood together on their hill, watching the sun set over land that had tested them in every possible way. Below, the ranch bustled with life men working, cattle grazing on newly green grass, smoke rising from the bunkhouse where Maria was undoubtedly cooking up a feast. "What are you thinking?" James asked. Clara smiled, looking down at their son, then up at the man who'd given her everything. "I'm thinking about that girl in the wagon, certain her life was over. If someone had told her that one day she'd be standing here, loved and respected, holding her child, managing a ranch alongside the best man in the territory, she never would have believed it." "Believe it," James said. "You've earned every bit of happiness." Clara Colt, and this is just the beginning. As the first stars appeared in the vast western sky, Clara knew he was right. She'd traveled from darkness to light, from captivity to freedom, from heartbreak to a love deeper than she'd ever imagined possible. The West had tried to break her, but instead, it had forged her into something stronger, a woman who could face any challenge, weather any storm, as long as she had her family beside her. Little Thomas yawned, settling into sleep, and Clara kissed his downy head. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did in this untamed land. But tonight, she was simply grateful. Grateful for second chances, for love that saw past circumstances to the soul beneath, for the family they'd built from the ashes of their separate griefs. "Let's go home," she said, and together they walked down the hill toward the golden lights of the house, their shadows long behind them, but their faces turned toward a future bright with promise, in the wild heart of the West, where the strong survived and the weak perished. Clara Bellamy Colt had not just survived, she had triumphed. From the girl sold by her brothers for 20 pieces of gold to the woman who helped run one of the territory's largest ranches, her transformation was complete. But more than land or cattle or status, she had found what her heart had always sought, a place to belong, a purpose to fulfill, and a love that would last until her final breath. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the promise of rain, new growth, and endless possibilities. And in the big house of the Double C Ranch, a family forged by choice rather than blood settled in for the evening, proof that sometimes the greatest treasures come from the deepest pain, and that love, true love, can indeed conquer all. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this incredible journey through Clara and James's story. We'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this tale of love and redemption from the Old West. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect with our Wild West Campfire community across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more authentic Western romance stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. What did you think of Clara's transformation? Share your thoughts. We read every comment and love hearing how these stories resonate with you.